All right, this morning we spent the whole entire time dealing with really the doctrine of justification. If you kind of break it all down, that's what we were really trying to do. And we were doing that, a lot had to do with what I heard in that sermon from the Sermon on the Mount, that whole series that we've been reviewing, that sermon on the Sermon on the Sermon on the Mount, the sermon about the Sermon on the Mount. And that disturbed me and bothered me greatly, just because that's no, it's not a Baptist church, a Bible church that far removed and has basically abandoned in any meaningful way the proper understanding of justification. So we spent all morning where it was very doctrinal, and hopefully it was helpful, and some of the people from the church are getting ready to listen to those. So hopefully, I don't know what good can come of all of that, but hopefully it was beneficial, and it stayed true to what we've tried to do in Romans, and it stayed true to what we're trying to do in the Niagara Creed. So we kind of try to accomplish a bunch of things. So tonight what we're going to do is try to move away from more theological. I always try to balance it out. Tonight will be much more practical. Some of this I've done as some of these have shown up in some of the Bible study exercises I've done. Some of these I haven't dealt with yet, but it's going to be pretty straightforward, and we're just going to look at how many things do I have here in my notebook. Let me look here, how many things I've written down. I don't even remember. 7. I have 7 things, which is dangerous. I know. You're like, so this is going to be a 7-month series. Okay, no, that hopefully not a 7-month series. But the goal here is just to be kind of like, here are these issues in Scripture that are very straightforward, but we just need to be reminded of them. And we're basically going to look at some of the do nots found in Scripture. Those situations where the Scriptures tells us, do not be this, do not do this. And of course, we're all very familiar with, do not enter, do not touch. So we're familiar with those kinds of signs. Do not disturb. We've seen those signs obviously within culture, but the Bible has a lot of do nots as well. And so we're going to look at least some of them. And I've dealt with some of these in Bible study exercises. And if you listen to those, hopefully you did some of that work. If not, well, we'll see where this all goes. All right, everybody ready? So I've got 7 of them. We're going to be straightforward. I'm not going to try any clever introduction. We're just going to jump in. The first one we're going to look at is 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians chapter 2. 2 Corinthians chapter 2. I'm going to grab this other Bible really quick. 2 Corinthians chapter 2. And the first one is found in verse 11. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11. All right? And even though, when I say the do nots in Scripture, I don't mean that every verse is going to say, every verse that we're going to look at is going to say do not, but the do not is clearly implied in the text. Does that make sense? All right. So I'm going to make sure I explain that, or I'll get some email going, well, the verse didn't say do not. Okay, but the do not is there, all right? 2 Corinthians 2:11. Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. All right, everyone see that? 2 Corinthians 2:11. Lest Satan should get an advantage of us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. Now this one is an obvious one. Do not be ignorant. And I did an entire series on do not be ignorant, do not be ignorant, do not be ignorant, because there's a lot of, sometimes we think of all the things that can hurt us spiritually, and a lot of times there's books written about beware of this and look out for this and look out for this. But sometimes we don't realize the danger of ignorance to our spiritual life, and ignorance can be greatly harmful. And here we are not to be ignorant of what? Satan's devices. We are not to be ignorant of his devices. We are not. And we are not to be ignorant of his devices, because what do we want him not to be able to do, according to this verse? To get an advantage over us. We do not want him to get an advantage over us. Now, if you go back to the previous verse, you'll get an idea of what Satan can utilize to get an advantage over us. Right? What is verse 10? What would verse 10 lead you to realize that Satan could possibly use to get an advantage over you? Do what? 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 10. Anyone you forgive, I also forgive, and what I have forgiven, if there was anything to forgive, I have forgiven in the sight of Christ for your sake, in order that Satan might not outwit us. That's how one translation reads. So how could Satan possibly get an advantage over us? By not forgiving. If you don't understand the context of what's happening, and it appears there's someone in the church, they were not forgiving. They seemed unwilling to forgive. Most people believe the person that's being spoken of here is the person in 1 Corinthians 5 who is engaging in physical relations with his father's wife. And he said, turn that person over to Satan for the destruction of the flesh. It appears at some point he had been punished, he had repented, and it appears now some people in the church were unwilling to forgive. And Paul's like, hey, I've forgiven, you need to forgive. And if we don't forgive, well, Satan can get an advantage over us. So what strategy then could Satan use to get an advantage over you? Unforgiveness. An unforgiving spirit places you in a vulnerable spiritual state so Satan can get an advantage over you. Because what does unforgiveness produce? Bitterness. Okay, and bitterness produces anger, hatred, right? You can just go on and on and on. And it begins to poison your emotions, it begins to poison your thoughts. Next thing you know, unforgiveness leads to bitterness. Bitterness leads to anger. It can lead to backbiting, gossip, slander. You just go on and on and on. And just one sin after it. Just one sin just adds to another sin, to another sin. Next thing you know, Satan gets an advantage over you. But we are not to be ignorant of his devices. And obviously, in the context, the device here is unforgiveness. That's the device here. Now, we can look at a lot of devices. We could go to Genesis and see how he worked, how he approached Eve, which I did an entire podcast episode about. And we talked about it before. I talked about it in the Genesis study in the Bible Institute. I've talked about it so many times, what Satan did there. I think a lot of people misunderstand it, but I'm not going to go back through it again. The point is, what I simply want you to get down tonight, first you may want to just write down the verse, and it's important to memorize it, is that we are not to be ignorant of his devices or his schemes, his tactics. We have to realize there, from a Christian perspective, that we believe that there is an actual entity, Satan, an actual spiritual being, who is actively engaged in trying to hurt us and damage us spiritually. Now, we understand he's not omnipresent. We understand that. But that doesn't limit his strategy. Because we know that what does he utilize? Since he cannot be present, what does he utilize? He utilizes three things. The world system, okay, the flesh, right? The world system and the flesh are at least two things that he clearly uses, right? Right? Everybody understand that? Like that's very important. The world system, he doesn't have to be present. He doesn't have to be present. The world system is just there that constantly throws ideas and philosophies out of that. And our own flesh, he doesn't even have to be present for that, right? Our own flesh is going to fight against us. So we are not to be ignorant. And we could go on, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. We could go all day on the different things that he tries to do. You can look at how he tried to tempt Christ. You could go all day talking about his devices. It's your responsibility not to be ignorant of them. And the only way you can understand his devices is looking at what Satan attempted to do in Scripture. So we could go through each passage, see what he attempted to do, and then try to understand how that could be applicable to you or applicable to us. Does that make sense? So do not be ignorant of his devices. Do not be ignorant of his devices. The problem with each one is each one I could spend a couple of months on, but you get the idea. And I've already done a lot of teaching on that. on the Theology Central podcast. You can go back and listen to that. That whole section, I think I did 5 parts maybe on do not be ignorant, and you can hear a lot of discussion in regards to that. All right, let's go to the next one. 2 Timothy chapter 3, which I did 2 episodes on this one. 2 Timothy chapter 3, because I think this one is very important. All right? 2 Timothy chapter 3. I'm going to offer an interpretation here that a lot of people I don't think agree with, but that's okay. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1. This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasures more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. All right? Now, we all know this passage, and we know this passage. Why? Why do we know this passage so well? Why is this passage spoken of so frequently within the Christian world? This is usually spoken of in what context? How do we know when we're reaching the last days? Right? How do we know we're reaching the last days? And what do people tend to do with it? How do you know we're reaching the last days? This describes what the world is going to look like. That's how it's preached. That's how it's preached. That's how it's preached. This is, if you want to know if we're reaching the last days, you turn on the news, you grab a newspaper, if those still exist, you listen to some news podcasts, you find out what's going on in the world, you compare it to 2 Timothy 3 verses 1 through 5. If the two seem to match up, then boom, you're in the last days. I don't believe this is referring to the condition of the world. I believe it's referring to the condition of the church. And here's a couple of... I could make you figure out why if you didn't hear the podcast episodes, but I will try to help you figure out why. All right? Number one, some of this description seems to fit the description of the world pretty much in every generation that's ever existed. All right? Men are lovers of their own selves. Isn't that the very nature of depravity? Covetous, is that not the very nature of depravity? Boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded. All of that sounds like the world, does it not? And I would say yes. So you can. Don't we read about that throughout all of society, going from Genesis all the way up to the book of Revelation? Yes, over and over and over. So, what gives me the right to say this text is probably referring to the church and not the world? Well, there's a couple of clues found in it. And I stopped short of the first one. The very next thing that I did not mention, or I stopped, I read verse 4, traitors, heady, high-minded, and then look at the next one. Well, the lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. Now, that would make no sense applied to the world.
No, they already do
I
that.
mean, why would you expect the world to love God, right? Doesn't make any sense. When could you ever say, the world loves pleasure more than lovers of God? That would be the most obvious thing like the sun is hot, right? The light is bright. It doesn't make any sense. The whole world is that way. But where would that make sense? That all of a sudden, if inside the church, people became lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, that would make sense, especially Paul is writing to Timothy in order to explain to him how to minister to the church. Saying that in the last days, this is what is coming. And then the next verse, I think Sarah just referenced it a second ago. Having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof, from such turn away. Look, having a form of godliness doesn't seem to describe the world, especially if you go back and read all of that previous description, right? The previous description that doesn't sound like the world having a form of godliness. That would be the world acting very ungodly. But this is the idea that they're having a form of godliness. What does it mean, a form of godliness? Like they still claim Christianity, they still go to church. But there's nothing there. There's no substance. There's nothing there. They just have a form of godliness. Now, so what would be the do not here? Do not get too comfortable. Because as a Christian, if we get comfortable, then we're not going to be prepared when this happens. This is coming to the church. It's not coming, look, it's going to always be in the world, but it's going to be inside the church. And you're going to look around going, what happened? What happened? What happened? What happened? What is exactly is supposed to happen? Now, the question is, don't get comfortable, but what do you do when it shows up? That's going to be the big issue, right? Paul tells them to do what? The end of verse 5, after he says to have a form of godliness, but turn away from such. Well, where does that lead you? If this is a description of what's coming to the church at large, where do you go? If you turn away, is there going to be other churches out there? Now you're going to say, well, some people will say, well, there always will be a good church, but that good church may not be where you live. Right? So where are you going to go? What are you going to do? That's going to raise a lot of difficult questions as we proceed. But I think biblically, I think we can agree that not only is culture going to get worse, the church is going to get worse. And if the church is going to get worse, then we can never get too comfortable thinking that, it's always no, it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and we have to be prepared for that. We have to see that coming. We have to understand, we cannot be ignorant. So think of it this way, we cannot be ignorant of Satan's devices, but we also cannot be ignorant of what's coming to the church. And you can call it do not be ignorant or do not be comfortable, or you can reword it the way I just did so. However you want to word it, I just want you to get the idea. There are those two things you cannot be ignorant of. You cannot be ignorant of what Satan is doing, and you cannot be ignorant of what's coming to the church. It's literally coming to the church. It's going to happen. There's not maybe it will, maybe it won't. And so we need to stop thinking. I know a lot of Christians still believe that, the big, especially in the charismatic world, they constantly preach this idea that there's a coming massive revival that's going to come and sweep across the nation and sweep across the world. Biblically, I don't see that. Biblically, I don't see a massive revival coming. I see massive apostasy coming. A massive falling away. And the falling away is not... Sometimes we get this idea, all those people are going to be out there. They're going to be out there and they're going to be apostate and crazy. No, you're going to turn around and go, what happened to Christianity? What happened to Christianity? And that's been a constant theme, that Christianity is being redefined. Christianity is being attacked. Christianity is turning into something that it's not. And it doesn't matter if it's happening from a liberal perspective or a conservative perspective. Christianity is being rewritten, and it's going to turn into something other than it is. And that's a pretty stark description of something I don't think anybody wants, right? Lovers of their own selves, it's going to be selfishness. Covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers. The false accusations with all the conspiracy theories in 2020 and 2021 coming from within the church has been literally insane. Incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God. It's going to be selfishness. It's going to be think of it this way. Do not be ignorant or do not become too comfortable, because what's coming is a self-worshiping Christianity, where in the name of Christ you're worshiping self. You say it's about Christ, but it's about self. And if you've seen so much of, I think, what's happened in 2020 going into 2021 from the American church, the church has been so preoccupied with self during a time when we should have been preoccupied with other people. The American church has been about us, me, my rights, what I want to do, what I'm going to do, what we are going to do. And it's like, what about anybody else around you? It's very different if you look at what happened in, what year was it? I think it's 1527. I could be wrong in dates because I get numbers wrong. But the Black Death, bubonic plague, had come to Wittenberg, Germany. And it was spreading, and it was bad situation. And Luther was being attacked by a lot of people from the decisions he made. And Luther made a decision. Look, they basically said, you need to get out of Wittenberg. And he was like, no, I don't want to leave Wittenberg. But he didn't want to leave so that he could I'm going to have a church service. He was like, no, because at that time, many cities didn't even have a doctor. So he's like, no, it's the Christian's responsibility to take care of people. So his house used to be a former monastery. He turned it into a hospital. It's like, we're going to take care of people. We're going to take care of people. We're going to do everything. We'll follow every rule you give us, but we're going to take care of the sick. We're going to help. In other words, his view was, well, our job is to be helping. 2020, the church was about, no, it's our right to do what we want. And who cares about helping anybody? And it's like, that how did we get so self-focused when Luther was so other-focused? And you can look at other times where pandemics hit the church, and the churches acted completely different than they did in 2020. Completely different. It's radical. Like, you go back into any time in church history when there was a pandemic, and you're like, whoa, they're literally do this, do that, and you're like, what happened? Well, what happened is a preoccupation with what? Self, our rights, our wants, to make it about us. Rarely did you hear Christians saying about making it about other people. That's the sign of, don't get comfortable. You think it's bad now, wait till you see what's coming. It's going to get worse. I don't know how bad it's going to get, and I don't know how quickly it's going to deteriorate, but that's what's coming. So we cannot be ignorant of Satan's devices. Do not be too comfortable, or do not be ignorant about what's coming to the church. However you want to word it, it's fine with me. All right. Number 3, 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. 2 Corinthians 11, and it's difficult for me doing it this way because I'd rather expound some of these passages, but I've already done a lot of the groundwork in all of the other podcast episodes, so I don't want to redo all of those again. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, and there's a couple of verses here we're going to look at. Starting in verse 13. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 13. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. Now, I did an entire episode on this. When I read this for the first time the other day, for my own study time, the words that jumped out and hit me were the words "for such." And I'm like, for such people. There's some people that he has in mind. And Paul was basically having a conflict here. What happened is Paul was trying, if you go back into the chapter, he's reminding the people at Corinth, look at all the things I've tried to do for you guys. I've loved you. I'm jealous for you. I want to present you before Christ as a chaste virgin. I've done everything I can to try to minister to you. In fact, what I have done, I have taken no money from any of you. I have not asked for any money. I have preached to you without taking any support from you. In fact, I've robbed other churches so that I could minister to you. But it seemed like these other ministers were also ministering without charging. Right? So Paul kind of understands, the reason I can't take any money, if I do, these false prophets are going to come along and they're going to say, look, Paul's just in it for the money. So he's undercutting their possible attack upon him. But it's these other apostles. And it seems that these other apostles were very, very good teachers and very well spoken. Because Paul makes this very interesting claim in verse 6. 2 Corinthians 11, verse 6. Right? In fact, if you go back to verse 5, for I suppose I was not a whit behind the very chiefest apostles. So he's saying, hey, I'm not behind these, I don't come behind these super apostles. I'm not less than these super apostles. You've got these other apostles running around. I'm not less than them, even though, look at the very next verse. What does he say? though I be rude in speech, or though I'm not a very good speaker, he wasn't as eloquent as these other apostles. He didn't speak as well as they did. They said all the words correctly, Paul didn't. He stuttered over the speech, they didn't. So he's trying to warn them, look, here are these individuals. No, maybe they're not going to charge you. Maybe they claim to be super apostles. Maybe they're very well spoken, but he's trying to warn them that just because they're doing these things, you should expect them to do these things, because how do false apostles and false teachers operate? They make themselves out to be, in fact, the exact ministers of righteousness. Very good. They make themselves out to be ministers of righteousness. Now, again, I would like to take you all through that, but I've already done that in podcast episodes. But so that when he says for such people, the people he's talking about starting really all the way back in chapter 11, verse 1, all the way through that, for those kinds of people are false apostles, right? That they are deceitful workers, and they transform themselves into the apostles of Christ. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived by false teachers, by false apostles. Do not be deceived by false apostles. And if you look at the context, what can deceive you? What can deceive you is their eloquence of speech and their generosity in service. They're not charging. They don't seem to be in it for the money. And they seem to be well-spoken. Guess what? Being well-spoken and not seemingly doing it for the money does not mean that they're not false apostles. How do you determine if someone's a true apostle or a false apostle? The teaching, the content of their teaching, not the quality of their speech. Look, we all know this. Everyone knows this. And it's so dangerous, but we all know this. You all have very personal preferences when you listen to someone speak, right? You have your likes, you have your dislikes. I could come in here with 30 podcasts and hit play and say, okay, what do you think? And some people, I don't like that. And it has everything to do, not with the content, but with the sound of their voice, how they speak. Some people love when someone goes on a full-blown rant. Some people love that. Some people hate that. Some people hear, I'll just take Alex Jones, conspiracy theorist and saying crazy. But some people, they hear his voice, it's like fingers on a chalkboard. He's got that gravelly voice, and then he starts ranting and raving. And if you've seen video, he rips off his shirt and runs around the studio with no shirt. He just loses his mind. It's great entertainment, but some people can't stand it. Some people, J. Vernon McGee, some people hear his voice, they cannot stand his voice. They can't stand it. But then some people love the sound of Joel Osteen's voice, I can't stand the sound of Joel Osteen's voice. But everyone has their preferences. So guess what happens? You can be easily deceived by the sound of someone's voice. Or not just the sound of their voice, what else? The way they present their information. Some people have a very warm, charismatic personality, right? They're very good at just breaking the ice, the way they do their introduction. They tell very personable stories. They have good comedic timing, and they get you laughing. And I've literally watched. I've sat there before and listening to a sermon, and then someone will say, "That was the best sermon I've ever heard," and I'll be like, "What? That was the best sermon?" And I'll go back and go, "What?" And I'll listen to the sermon 5 or 6 times. From whoever the pastor is, and I'll try to figure out, why did they think that was the best sermon ever? The sermon preached by Pastor James Coates in Canada, his last sermon before he got arrested, because violating all the COVID rules, he wouldn't obey. He preached on Romans 13, and I've had countless people tell me that's the greatest sermon in the history of Christianity on Romans 13. I reviewed that. It took 3-4 hours to review that thing. If that's the best sermon in the history of Romans 13, Christianity is in serious trouble because it was a train wreck of epic proportions in trying to deal with the actual text. So why would people loved it so much? Maybe it was the sound of his voice, but what else could it have been? He was saying, there you go. Sometimes we determine who a false prophet is based on if we like the message or dislike the message. So you cannot determine if someone is a false prophet based off their personality, based off their speech, based on their presentation, or based on whether you like the message. In fact, in some ways, and you got to be careful with this. In some cases, if you listen to preaching and that preaching doesn't make you mad or goes against the way you think, there's probably a very good chance that you're not listening to good preaching because God's word goes against the way we think and his ways are not our ways. So we should be in conflict a little bit with it, right? So do not be deceived. So and I think this is very important. The way we combat false prophets and false teachers is we don't judge it on any other criteria than its agreement with the faith once delivered unto the saints. And that's why we need what? Creeds, confessions of faith, catechisms. Because guess what? What will false preachers hold up? The Bible. What will cults hold up? The Bible. Right? People will hold up a Bible while you're in a village in South America drinking grape Kool-Aid, right? Okay, everyone holds up the Bible. Everyone holds up the Bible. So yes, we believe in the Bible alone, but we have to take the theology and the faith once delivered to us in Scripture and then clearly systematize it and articulate it in a way that it can clearly be seen, right? Because you can argue all day about Scripture. You say, well, wait a minute. You can get all twisted and turned around. Here's the faith once delivered. For example, the Apostles' Creed, or the Nicene Creed, or the Athanasius Creed, or London Baptist Confession, whatever. The Niagara Creed. That's at least getting it in a systematic way where you can say, does their preaching and teaching agree with that? Right? And if it doesn't, then you can say, there's problems here. There's problems here. But we cannot be deceived. I just want you to realize false preachers and teachers will, I've said it so many times, the greatest danger to a Christian is not the world, it's within Christianity. I've said it so many times. You are far in greater danger, and I know when I say this, people think I'm crazy. There's greater danger to a Christian listening to Christian radio than there is listening to any secular radio station. I don't care what genre of music, country, rap, pop, I don't care. There's less danger there than there is on Christian radio. Why? Why is there less danger? Because you don't expect listening to the latest pop song, right, to be giving you biblical theology, correct? Hopefully you'll catch, okay, that idea is not right. Okay, that's not, okay, I don't agree with that. You have a greater chance of hearing it. But what makes it so deceptive when it comes from Christian radio is it's surrounded with what kind of language? Biblical language. They speak about Jesus. They speak about God. They speak about the Bible. So it sounds so good. The greatest danger, false teachers are not going to come to you in the name of being a false teacher. They're going to come to you in the name of Christ. You've got to be able to hear that and see that. And the fact that people don't, I don't know. So, do not be ignorant. Do not get comfortable, or do not forget, or do not, how would we say the second one? Do not be too comfortable, I guess is the main way I put that. I gave another way of stating the second one as well. What was another way I gave the second one? I don't remember. Don't be ignorant of what's coming to the church, okay? But so we could do it that way as well. But the idea is, number one, do not be ignorant of Satan's devices. Number two, do not get too comfortable, or do not be ignorant of what's coming to the church. That would do not be ignorant twice, but you get the idea. And third, do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. And what are you not to be deceived by? False teachers. And what makes them so deceptive? They appear as the apostles of Christ. They appear, as Satan does, as an angel of light. They're going to appear godly, holy, righteous. They're going to look wonderful. You're going to be like, what's wrong with that person? Look at his personality. Look how good he speaks. Look how all of his charisma. Look, he kisses babies and remembers everyone's names, and he's perfect. He's perfect. Yeah, well, maybe. But human perfection does not mean doctrinal purity, okay? All right, does that make sense? All right, so we got to keep that in mind. Next, go to Proverbs 27. Proverbs 27:2. We could get a couple of do nots here, but okay. We'll just focus on 2. Proverbs 27:2. Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. Do not what? What are we being told not to do here? Do not praise yourself. Do not praise yourself. Now, I agree wholeheartedly that it's going to a deeper issue of pride. I completely agree that. But I'm saying do not praise yourself. Do not praise yourself. Seems like kind of a, you're like, well, really? Is that serious of it? This is not something that's going to get like, hey, everyone in the church, we've got a problem here. No, this is going to be one of those sins you could commit the rest of your life and nobody's ever going to care, right? This is one of those sins that, it's always funny when you find passages like, oh, everyone does that and nobody cares because it hasn't reached to that socially unacceptable sin. But this is telling you not to run around doing what? Bragging and praising yourself. You're not to do that. You're not to do that. Does everyone have a tendency to do that? Yeah, we do, right? Come on, everyone should say amen. We all have a tendency to do that. And why do we not want to do that? Because praising yourself, it would be, I would say, probably a symptom of a deeper problem. And what would be the deeper problem? Pride. And what does God feel about pride? Hates it. Hates it. So we should not praise ourselves. Everyone's done it to some level. And just remember, we don't want to go to there's 2 extremes here, right? There's pride, and what's the opposite error of pride? Or false humility. False humility, where someone gives you a compliment, and you're like, oh, no. And come on. Sometimes that's just false humility, because what you're almost saying is, come on, give me some more. Praise me some more. Come on. Really convince me that I'm that good. That's to the other extreme, right? You don't praise yourself. You don't praise yourself. Do not praise yourself, all right? We could spend more time with that one, okay? Go to John chapter 15. If you go look at verse 1 in Proverbs 27, there's another do not there. Do you see it? Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Do not speak about tomorrow as a certainty, but we won't get into that one. We could add it there, but okay. John chapter 15, verses, I think starting in verse 18, if I can read my writing. Okay. John chapter 15, starting in verse 18. If the world hate you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love his own, but because you're not of the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hateth you. Remember the word that I said unto you, that the servant is not greater than his Lord. If they have persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they have kept my saying, they will keep yours also. All right? What is the do not here? Do not be surprised when persecution comes. Now, clearly, first and foremost, this is dealing with the apostles, obviously. That's the historical context. But we should not be surprised as well. Now, it doesn't mean every person's going to be persecuted the exact same way. It doesn't mean that, because we have people live in different countries with different freedoms and different laws. But we should not be surprised when persecution arises. But what should we not do? We shouldn't be surprised, but we shouldn't run and try to find a way to make sure we get ourselves persecuted, okay? There's a time to be persecuted, and there's a time not to be persecuted, okay? And you've got to be smart about it. We've seen a lot of foolishness. And the main thing is, when you are persecuted, I mean, we could just have a long conversation here about this, but don't claim you're being persecuted for something you're not being persecuted for. For example, the whole situation in Canada, right? That pastor is not being prohibited from having church. That pastor is not being prohibited from preaching. I don't care how many times people claim that, they're liars. Canada did not prohibit them from having church services. Just said it could not exceed over 15% capacity. Said people had to wear a mask. It didn't say he could have 30 services a day. And there are other pastors who have churches right around there going, look, they're growing tired of it. They're like, stop the nonsense, stop the false narrative. Some of those pastors said, we have 7 services on a Sunday. We've not had one problem with the authorities. But hey.
Facebook Christians here in Abilene to pray for the church
And
Canada, to open the churches.
The churches are open. The churches are open. I'm so sick of hearing that. And so that's Christians just lying about persecution. And American Christians claiming that COVID persecuted them, and American Christians received $7.8 billion in federal funding to keep the churches open. That's not persecution. And when you go back to Rome, Roman government going, hey, you Christians, here's $7.8 billion to help you out. No! They were dragging them to the arena and killing them. Don't compare it to that. Don't be surprised when persecution comes, but don't make it up. And it's just,
what deception? You're not being shut down.
You're not. It's just a straight lie. You're not. I'm so sick of hearing the lies about it. He could be having church right now, but he won't. And so they've said, hey, all you have to do is say that you're going to go back and conduct the church service, and he won't abide by it, so he's still in jail. He could be at church. Yeah. Because he's been turning into a martyr, and now everyone around the world. Next thing you know, he's going to get out, write a book, do a DVD series, and he's going to be rich. Okay, I hate to say it, but that's what it turns into. But when Christians claim there's persecution when there's no persecution, that makes us all look foolish. Don't be surprised when you're persecuted, but don't make it up. Look, this is what he could say. I don't want to follow those rules. I can't have church, but I don't want to have church the way you're telling me to have church. I don't want 15% capacity. I want 100% capacity. I'm not going to follow the rules. And we don't want to wear a mask.
That would be the better thing to say.
Yeah, just say it that way.
I'm not happy with 15%.
And I don't want to wear a mask. So we're going to do what we're going to do. Okay, then state that. Then don't claim that's persecution. Don't claim they're stopping you from preaching. You're choosing not to preach. Because he could be having service after service. He could have 15, 20, 30, 40, 50. And be like, well, that's just not practical. Why? Do you realize before COVID, mega churches had multiple services? Right? Bellway would have 3 or 4, especially before they opened the campus on the north side. They would have 4 services. But after COVID, you can't do that. You can't do that. Because you turned it into a political thing instead of being biblical. So that's false. That's lying. And that's why when I did my message, I called it a narrative versus truth. We created a false narrative. Don't be surprised when you're persecuted, but you don't. Persecution is you not run out there, punch someone in the face, and then they arrest you. You're like, I'm being persecuted. Okay, no, you're being arrested for punching someone in the face. Okay, it would be like a church saying we don't like fire. Like if you build a church in some cities, there's lots of rules about fire codes. You got to have 2 exits. You have to fire extinguisher. It's like I'm not going to follow any of those rules, and then they shut the church down. You're like, we're being persecuted. Okay, no, you didn't follow the fire codes. Now, if you don't want to follow the fire codes, because you don't believe you can look at the percentage of people killed by fire in a church, and it's probably less than 99%, right? So hey, why follow the fire codes, right? So you're not going to follow. Okay, well then just say that you're not following the fire codes. Don't call it persecution. That's the thing. Don't be surprised when it comes, but don't make it up when it's not there. Don't make it up when it's not there, because if you make it up when it's not there, no one will take you serious when it does arise. You'll be like the kid crying wolf. You'll be crying persecution. Now there have been some. I still respect the person I respect the most, and all the churches during COVID was the crazy charismatic pastor who I would never agree with in Louisiana. CNN is right there in this parking lot, and they're like, "Why are you not following any of the rules?" It's like, we're a business. If we're closed, we don't get money. Yeah. He says, if that business over there is closed, I don't make any money. Well, if we're not open on Sunday, we don't make any money. So we're keeping the doors open. He straight up said, why? I stood up and applauded. Now, do I disagree? Yes, but what do I admire? Honesty. He was being honest. And so if he was going to be persecuted, he was being persecuted because he was staying open because they didn't want to lose money. It's like I got tired of all the drive-in church services where you get in your car and you sit in the parking lot listening on your radio and, we're standing for Jesus. We're not going to let them shut us down. And all the videos I saw of those, guess what also happened? Come into each car to get money. So were you doing it because you really wanted, I don't know what you were doing, or were you needing money? Just be honest. You know what I'm saying? So if it's persecution, it's going to be embarrassing to be a Christian in China, truly being persecuted and killed, and then look at Americans going, they want us to wear a mask. The persecution is so bad. I don't know if I can withstand it. Okay, come on. The early Christians being led to the arena to be fed to lions, and American Christians think it's persecution to be asked to wear a mask during a pandemic. It's just insane that's where things have gotten. But yeah, so don't be surprised when you're persecuted, but don't do what? Don't make it up. All right, don't make it up. Don't create. Be honest. Look, if he doesn't want to follow those rules in Canada, that's his choice. Just don't claim that you're not being allowed to preach. It would be like me saying, hey, guess what, in 2020, I wasn't allowed to preach. I only did 900 podcast episodes in 1 year. 900. Okay? So, did it stop the preaching? Did it even slow it down? No, it increased it because guess what? I didn't have to wait for you to show up. I could get here and go, okay, I just start preaching at 6:30 in the morning. Stop at noon. Yeah, over and over and over and over. Yeah. Then I would come back at 2 or 3 in the afternoon. But the point, no one could argue we didn't have church, so I couldn't be fed. Nobody could argue. And every other pastor could have done the exact same thing. I'm not smarter than anyone else, okay? I just talk more than anybody else. But if you're a pastor, talking should be kind of in your job description. So they could have preached. And so all of the excuses and all the claims of persecution. And again, you can't claim persecution getting 7.8 million. Look, me and Becca looked up all the churches in Abilene that received PPP loans. Church after church, $300,000, $400,000, $1 million. And then those same churches wouldn't follow the COVID guidelines. How can you not follow the COVID guidelines when you're being funded by the United States government? That's insanity. We didn't take, obviously, a dime from PPP loans. We never would. But if you're going to take the money, then at least follow the rules, okay? You can't not... The government's persecuting me. Yeah, it's persecuting you. Well, can you imagine that we literally lived through a period of time where the federal government in the United States of America paid churches so they could stay open? That is a violation of... Every Christian should condemn that. That's a violation of separation of church and state. That is wrong. That'd be after 9/11 because mosques were having a hard time and being persecuted, that our federal government supported all Islamic mosques. You know the outcry from Christians if that would have happened? They would have whined and complained all day. Oh, we're turning into a Muslim country. But it had no problem that the federal government gave over $7 billion to Christian churches. No problem. Gave money to Catholic dioceses who were almost bankrupt for paying out all of their sexual abuse cases. And now they just filled up their bank accounts. That's some messed up stuff. That's some messed up stuff. That's just, yeah, that's... Do not be surprised when persecution comes, but don't make it up. Okay, 2 more and we'll be done. Psalm 37:1. Yeah, that subject gets on my nerves so bad. Psalm 37:1. What's the do not hear? Psalm 37:1. What's the do not hear? Fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious against the workers of iniquity. What would be another word for fret not? All right, do not worry. I'm going to look in this translation, see how they handle it. They handle it with, if I can find the page, they do the same thing. Do not fret because of those who are evil. Look up the Hebrew word for fret really quick. If you have an electronic device, look up the word fret, the Hebrew word, and tell me what it means. I'll have y'all do this really quick. Do not fret. You don't have to pronounce the Hebrew word. Just give me the definition for the Hebrew word for fret. Psalm 37:1.
To glow or grow warm, figuratively to blaze up, of anger, jealousy, to be angry, burn, be displeased.
All right. So this is do not become angry or jealous. Okay? Angry or jealous, and who are we not to become angry and jealous about? Evildoers. Isn't that crazy how frequently Christians get so angry and upset about the evil world? Now, it seems like when Jesus got angry, he seemed to get angry at what was going on in the temple far more than he was getting upset of what was happening, say, at a house of prostitution. He didn't go to a house of prostitution with a whip. He went to the temple with a whip. He didn't go to the local, whatever place where whatever debauchery was going on with a whip. He went to the temple. We are to be upset with what's happening inside the church. We are not to be burning with anger and rage at what's happening in the world. Now, does that mean we should approve of what's happening in the world? No. We're supposed to, because we love God, is to hate sin. But I'm saying that we don't get so bothered by what the world is doing. The church always seems to get so bothered by what the world is doing. We always seem to get so upset with what the world is doing. It always fascinates me when you turn on Christian radio and they're going to talk about what's going on. They always want to talk about what the world is doing. Did you see that horrible movie on Netflix? Did you see this? Did you see that? Did you hear that horrible song? Did you see what they did at that concert? Blah, 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 blah. The world, 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 the world. And this says, do not what? Do not fret yourself because of those who are evil, or be envious of those who do wrong, or the King James says it, fret not thyself because of evildoers, neither be thou envious. There are two do nots here. Do not become angry or jealous, and do not become envious of those who do evil. It is interesting, there's two opposite feelings that we seem to get. It's either anger or envy. Anger or envy. I wonder why we get two different ones. Maybe we get angry because we want to be doing what they're doing. Or maybe we just get angry because it's misguided that we get so angry. I mean, what should we expect from depraved people? Logically, we should expect depravity on display, right? That's what we should expect. Don't become envious. Why can we become envious of evil workers? Because sometimes we see them seemingly to enjoy life in their evil. Does that make sense? In other words, they seem to be, they're pursuing evil, and they seem to have more money, they seem to have less problems, and we become envious of what they have. But what's the warning here? What's the reason we should not be either angry or fret not, become jealous or upset, and why should we not envy? For they shall soon be cut down like the grass and wither as the green herb. So what do they want us to understand? What kind of view of life do we need to have? We need a long-term view, not a short-term view. We need to see the long-term. Like, we need to have a long view, not a short view. We have a tendency to only see what's in front of us. We can only see the here and now and not the hereafter. And what the here and now is not the whole story. It's not even part of the story. It's not even think about what your life, let's say you live to be 70, just consider what your 70 years is in light of eternity. It's like a piece of dust. It's nothing. It doesn't even matter. So that's 70 years. You can be like, man, I wish I could have done this, and I wish I could do that, and I wish I could have had that, and look at what they have. You're missing the point. And the reason we miss the point is it's hard for us to see eternity because our vision is blocked by the temporal. The temporal blocks our view of eternity, right? I mean, come on, let's be honest. We see the temporal, right? That's what you see. I mean, look, we all know it. The second something goes wrong for us, right? The second, just view it in light of people. As soon as someone does something you don't like, they either insult you, they're mean to you, they lie about you, they gossip about you, whatever they may be, they hurt you, whatever the case may be. Can you see eternity at that moment? All you can see is right here, right now. That's all I see. And that issue is the most important issue that's ever come into your life. Because you've got to see beyond that and realize that what is that in light of eternity? You've got to see the situation beyond. I think I did a relatively good job trying to keep that perspective anytime I went. Well, and when I walked into high school, I had that perspective. I'm like, you know what we do here? You know what it means? Absolutely nothing. It's high school. No, you don't get your job and people are like, so how did you do in high school? Were you important in high school? Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. The only person who may care is when you apply for college and they care for about 3 seconds. 4 seconds later, they're like, oh, you were super important in high school. Nobody cares what you did in high school. And guess what? When you get out of college, the person who hires you for the job, they want to see that college, but they don't care about anything about, oh, you were part of that committee in school and you dealt with that problem. No, they don't care. So we always exalt the temporal to such that we feel like that it's almost the eternal. And that's why when one thing goes wrong, we can become completely discouraged, depressed, even suicidal because we can't see beyond right then and there. All we can see is the now and not the after. And we cannot do that. Do not fret yourself. Do not become, you can just list a number of things. Do not become angry, jealous, or envious over the evil people in the evil world. Do not do that. All right? And then I'll just mention this one. We won't even address this one. You can just look up Galatians 6:9 really quick. Galatians 6:9. I know this is very practical stuff tonight, but that's okay. Galatians 6:9. I wanted to completely change of pace from this morning. Galatians 6:9. Someone can read it out loud.
Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not.
Do not be weary and well-doing. And what can make you weary and well-doing? Only seeing the temporal and not the eternal, right? Same concept, right? You can either become so weary and well-doing because you're like, what's the point? And nobody cares. What am I doing? Or you can become so envious and angry and jealous at the evil world because all you can see is the temporal. These are both symptoms of the same problem. A temporal viewpoint that ignores the eternal. the temporal blinds us from the eternal. It's just a reality. It's hard to see it. It's hard to see beyond anything. When in the military, you'd go to work, and sometimes I would just look around like how upset people were over whatever crisis supposedly was going on, and I would just like, you know what? A year from now, no one's going to care. No one's going to care. No one's going to care in any way, shape, or form. We worked with people, and then they died. Guess what? I mean, or they would retire. 5 seconds after walking out of that building, nobody cared about anything that they did. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. Whenever I would get the phone, even years after, when I would go have an appointment at on base, and then I would get the survey that would call and say, hey, so here's some questions about your medical appointment. I would always laugh because I wrote all of those questions. I designed that whole program to check customer service. But you know what? If I went back, but nobody knows that I did that. Nobody knows. Nobody has a clue that who wrote that. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. No, does anybody care? I can say, hey, that survey, that's me. But whatever. I can go back and look at different things. I came up with that idea. Whoever's sitting in whatever office, they don't even know who I was. Everything I did, it may had a lasting impact, but nobody remembers who I was. So we get so caught up in the temporal because that's all that we can see, but there's something beyond the temporal, and we've got to have a different perspective. So we'll stop right there. Lord God, we come before you this evening. There's nothing in depth tonight, nothing deep, nothing revolutionary. This is very just basic scripture for us to just write down and just meditate on about things that you challenge us not to be a part of, not to do. And I just pray that we would just give these things some thought, that would challenge us, and you would help us pursue living in accordance with some of these ideas. And we ask this in Jesus' name. And God's people said,